is going on, everyone? Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back to the channel. This is Tiki ASMR. Tiki 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 Tiki. This is Tiki ASMR, and it's good to see you again. Today, I just wanted to do some Premier League ramble and do some phone tapping, which I haven't done. I don't think I've done in a video, or haven't done in a long time at least. So we'll do some phone tapping, and then I'll just talk through the previous game week. So I know weeks gone by really fast. We're almost to game week 7 already. So I just want to get in the recap for game week 6. But we'll just do some rambling and some phone tapping as I go through the scores. And yeah, I hope you enjoy. So I know I don't have the low lighting for this video. Recording in midday just on my lunch break. So don't mind the lighting. But we'll go and get started. The first game of match week 6. Match week 6 was the Brentford-Manchester United game, and Brentford looked pretty good. I think a lot of Manchester United fans were expecting to beat Brentford, and it just didn't pan out that way. But Igor Thiago scored in the 8th minute for Brentford, as well as the 20th minute. And the first goal was like a complete defensive breakdown. He was just like, it looked like he was so far offsides on like watching live, but he was onsides, and the Manchester United defenders just were not playing very well at all. So Brentford went up 2-0 within the first 20 minutes. But then Benjamin Sesko for Manchester United scored in the 26th minute, so entered halftime of Brentford being up 2-1. And then in the second half, it felt like Manchester United controlled a lot of the second half, especially. Ended up being a pretty even game overall, but Manchester United just couldn't quite get that second goal. Bruno Fernandes had another penalty kick to potentially tie the game, and instead it was saved. It wasn't a very well taken penalty kick, so Manchester United couldn't get that second goal. And then at the very, very end of the game, Matthias Jensen for Brentford added a third goal, so Brentford won 3-1. Another game that ended 3-1 was the Brighton-Chelsea game. So this was a game where Chelsea came out and scored in the 24th minute. So Enzo Fernandez had a pretty nice goal early on in the first half. However, in the second half, in the 53rd minute, Chalobah for Chelsea got a red card and was sent off. So Chelsea was up 1-0, but they were down a man. And they still played pretty well overall, I'd say. I mean, it was definitely defensive on their end, but they ended up winning the possession battle 60% to 40% still, and ended the game with more shots on, more total shots and the same amount of shots on target as Brighton. But Brighton scored in the 77th minute, so right when the game's kind of winding down and teams start really pushing for a tying goal, Danny Welbeck scored in the 77th minute. So the game was tied 1-1. And then Brighton scored in the 92nd minute, as well as the 100th minute. So 2 extra time, late goals in this game. De Cooper, I believe I'm saying that correct. De Cooper, for Brighton, their defender, scored in the 92nd minute, and then Danny Welbeck actually scored another goal, his second goal of the game, in that 100th minute. So Brighton ended up beating Chelsea 3-1. 3-1. And, I think Chelsea, obviously felt like they could have won or tied that game, but when you're down a man essentially the entire second half, it's a tough one to come back from. So, not a bad loss for them at all. Just something that kind of happened. And then the Crystal Palace Liverpool game. So, this is one that I watched every single minute of. Because Crystal Palace is the team that I cheer for, and this was, I'd say, probably the best matchup of the week was Liverpool Crystal Palace, just because it was two teams that were both undefeated in the Premier League this season. And I thought Crystal Palace looked pretty good. Crystal Palace came out as the more aggressive team. In the first half, there's actually a chance that they could have been up like 2 or 3-0. They did score in I think it was the 9th minute. Let me confirm. Yeah, the 9th minute. Ismail Assar, who seems to play really well against Liverpool. He had a nice goal off of a corner kick that the ball kind of bounced around and then he finished it. So Crystal Palace was up 1-0. And then they had like 3 or 4 other chances. The Liverpool goalie Allison had a really nice save and then another really nice save. So I'd say he was probably the man of the match until the final like closing seconds. But Crystal Palace led 1-0 and played really well the entire game up until the 87th minute when Liverpool sub Federico Chiesa, who already had a really nice goal earlier this season, he added another goal in the 87th minute. So at this point, I was like, dang, I thought Crystal Palace might win this game. It would have been a really good result. A tie's not bad. I just wanted them to keep their unbeaten streak. But Chiesa scores in the 87th. So I was anticipating that, okay, it's probably going to be a 1-1 tie. Both teams were still kind of pushing for a win, though. And then in the final seconds of the game, in the 97th minute, Crystal Palace had a long throw-in into the box. And then it was like a back header. Ball bounced around a little bit. Will Hughes kept the ball in. Gahey got his head on the ball to like flick it onwards to the back of the net, and then our substitute actually was able. The ball just fell right into Eddie Nketiah's lap, and he had a really nice touch to get the ball centered in front of him, and he shot it and scored in the final seconds of the game, and the crowd went like absolutely crazy. So Crystal Palace ended up winning 2-1, and moved up to second or third. I can't remember. I think it was second place, but now they're third based off of another result the following day in the Premier League. So really good result for them. They have a streak of 18 unbeaten games in a row where they either won or tied. So that's pretty impressive. But yeah, really fun game to watch there. Next up, we have the Leeds-Bournemouth game. So Leeds-Bournemouth was a matchup that I thought could be pretty fun just because I think both offenses are pretty stout and both defenses are good, not great. So in this game, Anton Semenyo scored in the 26th minute for Bournemouth on a nice free kick where it was kind of like there was a wall and then a person laying down, and Semenyo somehow found that gap in the wall of like slightly above the player that was laying down to block like the ground kick, but not so high that the players in the wall who were jumping were blocking it. So he kind of found that nice path in between that and scored in the 26th. And then Joe Rodon, the Leeds player, scored in the 37th minute, so it entered halftime 1-1, 1-1. And then Leeds actually took the lead, so Leeds did a really good job counterattacking, and pressing the ball up the field. and Longstaff scored in the 54th minute to have Leeds go up 2-1. And I'd say they looked like the better team for the vast majority of the second half. I felt like they generated a lot more shots on target. I felt like they generated a lot more quality chances. Let's take a look at the. So Leeds ends the game with 1.84 expected goals compared to Bournemouth's 0.82. Leeds got 19 total shots compared to Bournemouth's 12, and Leeds got 8 shots on target compared to Bournemouth's 5. So their attacking, especially in the second half, looked really solid. So Longstaff scores in the 54th, make it 2-1. And then Bournemouth substitute, Eli Krupi Jr., I believe he's like 18 or 19 years old. He's really young, but he actually scored in the 93rd minute. So I thought Leeds was going to come away with a win, which would have been huge for them. They're already having a really good Premier League season for like a promoting team, but I thought they were going to get the win. But Krupi Jr. scores in the 93rd minute for Bournemouth to make it a 2-2 tie. And then the other big game that I watched every second of was Manchester City and Burnley. And the reason I was so invested in this game was because in Fantasy Premier League, if any of you play, you get one triple captain chip per like half season. And I actually used my triple captain chip on Erling Haaland in this game, so I was hoping that he would do really well. I figured Manchester City would score at least 3 to 4 goals, and they scored a little bit more than that. So in this game, it was back and forth for a little bit, especially in the first half, where it seemed pretty even. And then Manchester City pulled away in the second half and really put their foot down on the throat of Burnley. So in the first half, there was a own goal by Esteve for Burnley. He's the Burnley defender that I think is pretty good. I think he's a really good player. He had a pretty unfortunate game, but there's an own goal by him in the 12th minute, so Manchester City went up 1-0. And then in the 38th minute, Jaden Anthony for Burnley scored in the 38th. I'm saying minutes a lot, but, so it was 1-1. And then it was back and forth. There was a couple chances to end the first half by both teams, but went into halftime at 1-1. And then in the second half, it was like all Manchester City. So Manchester City, you could tell in the second half immediately, like just the pressure and the ball control of Manchester City was looking really good. They didn't actually score until the 61st minute, but Nunez for Manchester City scored in the 61st. And then Esteve, the Burnley defender that had the own goal in the first half, he had another one. He had another one in the second half. In the 65th minute. So just 4 minutes apart, Manchester City had gone from 1-1 tied to 3-1 up. And then Erling Haaland, who had a relatively quiet game, he had a couple chances that he couldn't quite connect on. And I was, watching, hoping that he would generate a goal. He had 1 assist up till this point, which isn't bad, but when you're triple captaining a player in fantasy, you definitely want at least like a contribution, like a goal scoring contribution. But he ended up scoring in the 90th minute as well as the 93rd minute. So similar to Mo Salah, who's had a couple like extra time goals this season to help out the fantasy players. Erling Haaland definitely did that for my fantasy team. But Manchester City ended up winning 5-1, and Erling Haaland ended up with those 2 goals as well as an assist. So, pretty fun game. I really wasn't expecting Burnley to compete in this game. They're starting to look like the most likely promoting team to demote back down immediately because Leeds and Sunderland are both looking really good. Burnley, I think that they last year was probably the best of the three teams, but they didn't bring in nearly as many transfer players as the other two teams. So their team just seems a little bit weaker. They're in the mix of the 4 or 5 teams that I think will likely demote. So, and then Nottingham Forest Sunderland. Not a whole lot to talk about in this Nottingham Forest Sunderland game. There was only one goal, and it felt like a very defensive battle towards the end of the game, just because Sunderland was just kind of packing it back. The first half looked like it was a lot more fun, where there's a lot more shots and a lot more back and forths. Um, I'm also talking about the game like it's like it was a boring game. It's not necessarily boring. There just wasn't a whole lot to talk about. I'd say there was a lot of shots. There just wasn't a whole lot of shots on target or like really scary goal scoring chances. Um, Let me go down and see. Yeah, so there was 33 total shots in the game, but only 9 of them were on target. So it felt like there was a lot of action, but there wasn't as many like legit goal scoring opportunities. With that being said, Nottingham Forest did have a couple chances, and they actually come away with 0 goals in the game. So they had 1.68 expected goals and couldn't net one of them. And then Sunderland, um, Omar Alderete had a goal in the 38th minute for Sunderland. So Sunderland went up 1-0 in the 38th, and then that ended up being the only goal of the game. So um, not too much to talk about there. And then the possession battle, Nottingham Forest won the possession battle 65% to 35%. Had twice the number of shots, but not a lot of them on target. They did finish with 6 total shots on target compared to Sunderland's 3, but once Sunderland got that first goal, like they were like, we're good, we're just going to defend. So, pretty good result for Sunderland, who is looking really good. They're also in the top 4 or 5 in the Premier League table. And then Spurs Wolves. Wolves had entered the game with 5 losses, so 5 games, 5 losses, no points on the season at all. And they were playing Tottenham, who, with Thomas Frank, their new coach, they've looked really good this season. So I was expecting Spurs to beat Wolves like 2 or 3-0. But Wolves actually played really well. Wolves went up 1-0 in the 54th minute, so first half 0-0. But in the 54th minute, Wolves went up 1-0. And then it looked like Wolves was going to win 1-0 and get their first win of the season and 3 huge points as they try to avoid relegation. But the Spurs score a goal in the 94th minute. So I think there was just like 2 minutes left in the game after the goal. So it wasn't like final seconds like the Crystal Palace goal, but it was at the very, very end, where Palhinha scored in the 94th minute for Spurs, and the game ended up being a 1-1 tie. And you could just tell like a lot of the Wolves players and the Wolves coach were like devastated because they thought that they had earned the win. Definitely felt like they had earned the win, but Spurs tied it up really, really late, 1-1. And then going to the Sunday games, there was just 2 Sunday games. So Aston Villa and Fulham. This was actually nice to see Aston Villa get back on track. Aston Villa all season has struggled with trying to put the ball in the back of the net. But in this game, they score 3 goals against a solid Fulham team. So Ollie Watkins scored his first goal of the season in the 37th minute, but not before Raul Jimenez for Fulham scored in the 3rd minute. So that was a game where it kind of felt like a nightmare start for Aston Villa because Fulham scored right away in the 3rd minute. But Ollie Watkins does get his first goal of the season in the 37th, and the teams went into halftime tied at 1-1. I feel like a lot of the games went 1-1 into halftime. And then John McGinn scored in the 49th minute, so just shortly after the second half started. John McGinn for Aston Villa scored to go up 2-1. And then in the 51st minute, just like 2 seconds, 2 minutes later, but there's always like the goal celebration, so it felt like 45 seconds, 50 seconds after the game had continued. Um, Buendia, Buendia for Aston Villa scored to go up 3-1. And then at that point, Aston Villa played solid defense. I would say the three goals, I'd say a couple of them were like pretty unlikely goal scoring chances. So I'd be interested to see what the expected goals look like, because it definitely felt like a couple of them were either lucky or just heavily skilled, depending on how you look at it. Um, yeah, it looks like Aston Villa only had a 1.11 expected goal, so more times than not, they only have one goal, maybe two, but they end the game with three. So pretty good there, but much needed win, much needed offensive performance for Aston Villa. So they win 3-1 over Fulham. And then we have the Arsenal Newcastle game, and this was the third game that I watched every minute of. Where Newcastle scored in the 34th minute. Nick Voltamade scored in the 34th minute. And I really like watching him. He's like this super tall, lanky guy that has really good ball control. But he scores in the 34th, so Newcastle goes up 1-0 on Arsenal. And then it was a very defensive battle for them. Newcastle didn't really generate, I'd say, any real chances after that. They end the game with 0.61 expected goals, only 8 total shots, only 3 shots on target, so not a whole lot of chances there, but they were up 1-0 all the way up until the 84th minute, where Arsenal then, their defenders both really stepped up, where Marino scored in the 84th minute for Arsenal to tie it 1-1. And then both teams, once the game was tied, started pressing a little bit more. So that's where Newcastle started actually pressing up a little bit more, trying to score again. But Gabriel for Arsenal scored in the 96th minute, just a couple minutes before the game ended. So another week where there seems like there's been a lot of like late goals going on. But Arsenal wins 2-1, which is an awesome result for them because they trailed and looked like the team that was going to lose for the vast majority of it, and then they score in the 84th and 96th to go from 1-0 down to 2-1 up. So, really good result for Arsenal. That was needed because Liverpool was starting to pull away a little bit. So, this is a good result to get them closer, especially after Liverpool lost to Crystal Palace. And then the final game of the week that I didn't get to watch because it was on a Monday while I was at work was the Everton West Ham game. Everton West Ham on Monday. And Everton scored in the 18th minute. Michael Keane scored, so Everton was up 1-0. And then in the second half, Jared Bowen scored in the 65th minute for West Ham. So it was 1-1 was the final score. And this was one where I watched the highlights for it. It didn't seem like there was too much going on. The expected goals ended 0.73 for Everton, 1.19 for West Ham. So a 1-1 draw seems like kind of what was expected. Everton had 6 shots on target. West Ham had 3. The possession battle was pretty even at 52% to 48%, but this was one that, from what I could tell, looked like a pretty even matchup. And not that 1 point is like huge, but I think West Ham getting any points is big for them so they can help build up momentum because they're another team that's been just dragging a little bit. There's some talk about if their coach is going to be replaced, is something that I was hearing. But West Ham gets a point, Everton gets a point, 1-1 draw for them. So those are all the games for game week 6. And then I can also just do a quick preview of the game week 7, which actually starts on Friday this week. So there's a Friday game. And then there's a lot of Sunday games. So less Saturday games, more Sunday games this week. But Bournemouth and Fulham are playing tomorrow on Friday. Leeds and Spurs are playing on Saturday. Arsenal, West Ham, Manchester United, and Sunderland. So Manchester United has a chance to bounce back after a pretty disappointing loss to Brentford. They're playing Sunderland, who's looked awesome this season, but is one of those promoting teams. So it should be a pretty interesting game. And then the late game on Saturday is Chelsea-Liverpool. So that's going to be like the game that I figure most casual fans are watching is Chelsea-Liverpool, two really big, well-known teams. And then on Sunday, you have Aston Villa-Burnley. So Aston Villa has a chance to keep their goal scoring continuing because Burnley just let in 5 goals against Manchester City. So hopefully Aston Villa can score another 2 to 3 goals to continue on that goal scoring trend. Everton Crystal Palace. My team plays at 7 a.m. I'll be in Kansas this weekend, so it'll be 8 a.m., which is a little bit better of a start time. But 8 a.m. on Sunday, Everton Crystal Palace. At the same time, there'll be Newcastle Nottingham Forest, Wolves and Brighton, and then the late game on Sunday is Manchester City and Brentford. So some good matchups. There's always a couple games that jump out every single week as something that's pretty interesting. But those are the matches for this upcoming game week. So thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the soft-spoken ramble and the phone tapping. And I'll be back again with another video for you very, very soon. See ya.